have you ever poured your absolute heart and soul into a massive project? Like the kind of undertaking that just consumes your every waking thought?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The kind where you are utterly convinced it's your ultimate masterpiece.
Right. And you finally put it out into the world, you're holding your breath, you're waiting for the applause, and you just watch it fail.
Completely fail.
Completely, utterly, and publicly, only for that exact same project to become this legendary pillar of human culture long after you are gone and buried.
It is honestly the ultimate tragic irony of the creative process. I mean, achieving historical immortality, but being denied the experience of a single second of it while you're actually alive to appreciate it.
Yeah, that tension between total failure and total immortality. We are taking you on a journey into a 600-page literary behemoth.
It is definitely a behemoth.
A book that effectively killed its author's career in the mid-19th century, but eventually became a monumental, inescapable force in global literature. We are diving deep into Herman Melville's 1851 novel, Moby-Dick.
And the goal for you, listening right now, is to provide a shortcut through those imposing depths. Let's be candid. Those 600 pages can feel incredibly intimidating.
Very intimidating.
Even for the most seasoned reader. So we're going to extract the mind-blowing philosophical insights, the terrifying cosmic horror, and the visceral history embedded in this story.
The objective is for you to grasp the sheer, terrifying genius of this work without necessarily having to wade through all those grueling encyclopedic maritime chapters yourself.
Exactly. We do the heavy lifting so you get the payoff.
Right. And it just makes you wonder how a book with such a colossal reputation today could have missed the mark so badly with its own generation. Like, what exactly were readers expecting in 1851 that Melville completely shattered?
Well, when he finished the manuscript, he genuinely believed he had penned a masterpiece that would place him among the literary gods. He thought he was writing the great American epic.
But how did the public actually react?
The reaction was essentially a collective shrug.
Ouch.
Followed by intense mockery. The critics were just baffled by it, and readers simply ignored it. I mean, in Melville's entire lifetime, the book sold fewer than 3,500 copies.
That is painfully low for a writer of his caliber.
And the financial reality was even more humiliating. His publisher eventually sent him an accounting statement showing that due to the abysmal sales and the cost of printing, Melville actually owed them money.
He owed them money for his own masterpiece.
Yes. Even his close friend, the writer Nathaniel Hawthorne, the guy the book is famously dedicated to, reportedly offered very little in the way of public support or enthusiastic correspondence about the final published work.
To owe money on your magnum opus is just a special kind of devastation. It's hard to fathom the psychological toll that must have taken on someone who had pushed himself to the absolute limits of his intellectual capacity.
It thoroughly broke his spirit. Melville essentially retreated from the literary world. He took a profoundly monotonous, grueling job as a New York customs inspector.
Inspecting cargo on the docks.
Exactly. And he stayed in that position for 20 long years. He lived out his remaining decades in isolation, relative poverty, and deep bitterness, occasionally writing complex poetry that practically no one bothered to read.
And then when he finally died in 1891, the ultimate historical insult occurred.
The New York Times obituary.
Right. The New York Times published his obituary, and they actually misspelled his name. They remembered him as Henry Melville.
Henry Melville. It's just devastating. He died essentially an anonymous man in the city where he worked.
So the journey from Henry Melville, forgotten customs inspector, to the author of the great American novel is just staggering. It took until the 1920s, nearly 3 decades after his death, for a new generation of modernist critics and academics to dust off this massive text.
And they read it through the lens of a post-World War I world and suddenly realized the public had entirely missed the point.
This wasn't just a bloated fishing tale.
Not at all. It was a cosmic epic, a philosophical study, a Shakespearean tragedy, and a scientific encyclopedia all rolled into one sprawling narrative.
That new generation of readers recognized the sheer, unbridled ambition of the text. And that ambition announces itself immediately with what is arguably the most famous opening command in the English language.
Call me Ishmael.
Call me Ishmael. Such a brilliant opening, but the context behind it is what makes it so gripping. You look at why Ishmael is actually going to sea. He tells you right up front that he has no money, he is grappling with a crushing depression, and he finds himself inexplicably drawn to pausing before coffin warehouses.
Yeah, that damp, drizzly November in his soul.
Exactly. For Ishmael, stepping onto a whaling ship is an alternative to walking into the street and ending his own life. The ocean is a desperate escape from an existential despair.
He is searching for a reason to continue existing in a world that feels suffocating. So he heads to Nantucket, the absolute epicenter of the global whaling industry at the time, to find a berth.
But the narrative hinges on this profoundly transformative encounter he has in New Bedford before he even steps onto a boat.
Because of crowded conditions at a cheap inn, the landlord forces him to share a bed with a total stranger.
Waking up in the arms of Queequeg is such a brilliantly disorienting scene. Imagine the sensory shock for a 19th century white American.
It's wild. You wake up next to a massive, heavily tattooed Polynesian harpooner who carries around a shrunken head and prays to a small wooden idol right there in the room.
Melville initially builds up the terror of the savage, leaning into every stereotype his 1851 audience would expect, and then he completely pulls the rug out from under them.
He entirely dismantles those prejudices. Queequeg is revealed to be incredibly noble, fiercely loyal, and generous to a fault.
He splits his money with Ishmael right away.
He does. He is, in every measurable moral category, vastly superior to the so-called civilized Christian men who gawk at him in the streets.
Melville writes this deep, equal, and profoundly tender friendship across racial, religious, and cultural lines.
And you have to remember the era. Slavery was still legal. Racial hierarchies were considered biological fact. Depicting a bond of absolute equality and literal shared wealth between a white American and a tattooed Polynesian man was a genuinely radical political act.
That dynamic is the perfect primer for the environment they are about to enter, the whaling ship itself, the Pequod. You look at the command structure of this ship, and it's essentially a spectrum of human coping mechanisms crammed onto one wooden deck.
It really is a microcosm of pre-Civil War America.
You've got Starbuck, the first mate, who uses religion, duty, and extreme rationalism as a shield against the horrors of the world. He is the only one who clearly sees the impending disaster.
Beside him is Stubb, the second mate, who utilizes a completely different coping mechanism, which is relentless, almost manic humor.
Right, he handles the constant looming threat of death by literally laughing in its face, treating the terrifying enterprise of slaughtering leviathans as a bizarre, detached game.
Then you have Flask, the third mate, whose response to the vastness of nature is pure aggression. He seems to hold a deeply personal, violent grudge against whales, viewing them merely as oversized pests that need to be eradicated.
But the psychological weight of the ocean isn't fully realized until we look at Pip, the young black cabin boy. He experiences a trauma that strips away all those coping mechanisms.
The scene with Pip in the water is one of the most terrifying in the book.
During a chaotic hunt, Pip falls out of the small boat into the open ocean and is left behind in the vast rolling water for hours while the crew chases a whale. Melville describes the sheer, crushing isolation of the sea, an infinite expanse of water below and an infinite expanse of sky above.
That sensory deprivation, the overwhelming realization of his own insignificance, it completely fractures his mind.
It is a masterful, haunting depiction of psychological breakdown. In losing his conventional sanity, Pip gains a terrifying, almost Shakespearean prophetic wisdom.
He becomes a holy fool, seeing the fundamental truths of the universe that the supposedly sane men on the ship refuse to acknowledge.
And Pip's marginalization ties into a broader, crucial point about the Pequod's radical democracy.
Exactly. While the officers shouting the orders are white, the actual fate of the ship, the literal engine of its financial success and physical survival, rests entirely in the hands of three non-white, non-Christian harpooneers.
Placing the survival of a white-led capitalist vessel entirely in the hands of marginalized men flips the racial hierarchy of 1850s America on its head. Tashtego, a Native American, Dagu, an African, and Queequeg, the Polynesian, are the true apex predators on this ship.
It makes you realize the Pequod isn't just a whaling vessel, it's a floating political statement heading into the abyss.
And heading into that abyss requires a captain.
And what a captain.
For the first several chapters of the voyage, the captain is a ghost. He is completely unseen, confined to his cabin, while the crew exchanges nervous whispers about his condition.
Melville uses that absence to build almost unbearable anticipation, so that when the captain finally makes his theatrical entrance on the quarterdeck, the psychological impact is monumental.
When Captain Ahab finally steps out, the visual is arresting. He is described less like a man and more like a ruined monument. He stands on a prosthetic leg fashioned entirely out of the polished, white jawbone of a sperm whale.
And running down the entire side of his face and neck is a stark, livid lightning bolt scar.
He stands on the deck in absolute terrifying silence, like a statue carved out of pure compressed rage.
The physical presence alone is intimidating, but it is the psychological contagion he spreads that changes the trajectory of literature. Ahab summons the entire crew to the mast and reveals the true, unhinged purpose of their 3-year voyage.
They are not there to hunt whales for oil.
No, they are not there for profit. They are there for a singular, obsessive act of revenge against the specific white whale that tore off his leg.
He nails a solid gold Spanish doubloon right to the main mast, this mesmerizing visual focal point, offering it to the first man who spots Moby-Dick.
And then he forces the harpooneers to cross their lances, fills the sockets of their weapons with fiery liquor, and makes the entire crew swear a blood oath to hunt this creature to the death.
Starbuck is standing there, watching this unfold, completely horrified. He tries to inject reason, pointing out that demanding vengeance against a dumb animal acting on blind instinct is not only blasphemous, it's suicidal.
But Ahab's charisma is an overwhelming force of nature. You cannot negotiate with Ahab. You can only be pulled into his gravitational orbit.
And this is precisely why literary critics place Ahab alongside the greatest characters ever constructed.
He is a profound literary amalgamation. He embodies the defiant rebellion of Prometheus stealing fire from the gods,
The howling madness of King Lear raging against the storm on the heath,
the tragic, doomed bargain of Faust, and the unyielding pride of Milton's Satan, who famously declared it is better to reign in hell than serve in heaven.
He represents the absolute darkest mutation of the American dream. The celebrated cultural ideals of relentless self-reliance, boundless ambition, and the refusal to accept any natural limitations. When pushed to their absolute extreme, those ideals mutate into an obsessive, world-destroying madness.
And Melville distills that exact philosophy into Ahab's famous pasteboard masks monologue.
That monologue is the philosophical engine of the entire novel.
When Starbuck accuses Ahab of madness for hunting a dumb brute, Ahab fires back. He explains that all visible objects in the universe are just pasteboard masks, like cheap theatrical props on a stage.
He is convinced that there is some unknown, calculating, and fundamentally malicious force hiding behind the physical mask of the world.
To Ahab, Moby-Dick is not a fish. The whale is the mask.
Ahab is hunting meaning itself. He wants to physically strike through the wall of the material universe to confront whatever intelligence is pulling the strings.
And if you connect that to modern human psychology, it is deeply unsettling. We still see this today, the desperate human need to find patterns, intent, or even a malicious conspiracy behind random, indifferent tragedies.
Ahab would rather believe in a cruel, evil god that he can fight than accept a universe that simply does not care about him. He wants to punch through that wall, even if the most terrifying truth is that there is absolutely nothing on the other side.
Which leads us directly into the great unresolved mystery at the heart of the text. What does the white whale actually represent?
Over the last century and a half, scholars have argued that Moby-Dick represents God, or the uncompromising force of nature, or absolute evil, or the crushing weight of industrial capitalism.
And Melville's brilliance is his absolute refusal to give you a definitive answer. Instead of explaining it, he dedicates an entire deeply unnerving chapter to the whiteness of the whale.
He systematically goes through every cultural and historical association humans have with the color white. He talks about the purity of religious robes, the majesty of royalty, but then pivots to the sheer terror of the white polar bear, the deadly white squall of a storm, and the pale shroud of a ghost.
He guides the reader to a horrifying realization. White is not actually a color. It is the fundamental absence of color. It was a blankness.
The ultimate terror of Moby-Dick is not that the whale is a creature of pure, calculating evil. The true, paralyzing terror is that the whale, and by extension the natural universe, might mean absolutely nothing at all.
It is a blank, indifferent void onto which human beings project their own fears and desires.
Decades before the philosophy of existentialism became a formalized movement in Europe, Melville was exploring its most terrifying questions on the deck of a whaling ship.
How do you construct a life in a universe that is fundamentally indifferent to your existence? It's not actively out to get you. It just doesn't care.
You see, the three distinct philosophical reactions play out perfectly on the ship. Ahab violently and fruitlessly rebels against that indifference. Ishmael quietly observes, accepting the chaos, and tries to comprehend it without being destroyed by it.
And Starbuck clings desperately to his traditional religious faith and societal duty as a barricade to avoid looking into the void.
It is an immense philosophical weight for what was ostensibly sold as an adventure novel. And to be completely impartial, we have to acknowledge that the common criticisms of this book, the reasons it frustrates so many readers, are entirely valid.
It is a daunting 600 pages. The narrative pacing can be agonizingly slow.
Ishmael, who begins as this incredibly vibrant, relatable narrator, eventually recedes into the background, becoming a sort of detached, omniscient voice. And many of the secondary crew members operate more as philosophical symbols than fully fleshed out human beings.
And we absolutely have to talk about the encyclopedic chapters, which are notorious.
If you've attempted the book, you know the exact wall readers hit. Melville will literally stop the narrative momentum dead in its tracks to deliver a grueling, highly technical, 50-page treatise on the skeletal anatomy of a sperm whale's head.
Or he will break down the specific mathematical tension of the ropes used on the ship.
Or detail the exact brutal, bloody mechanics of extracting and boiling blubber in the tryworks at midnight. It genuinely feels like you've accidentally picked up a 19th century maritime textbook.
It is jarring, but if we analyze those chapters structurally, there is a distinct, deliberate genius behind that exhaustion. Those encyclopedic tangents are not just filler to hit a word count.
They are deeply intertwined with the book's core philosophical theme, which is the absolute impossibility of human beings fully knowing or mastering the universe.
Melville is demonstrating the total failure of human systems. He uses language, scientific classification, anatomical measurement, and rational thought to try and capture the true majesty, scale, and terror of the whale.
He tries to categorize it by folio size, paint it, dissect its spine, and map its migrations. But the whale always escapes definition. The science falls short.
Melville is effectively arguing that to truly know the Leviathan, to understand the raw, unbridled power of nature, reading a textbook is useless.
You have to be in the freezing water with it, smelling the blood, feeling the splintering wood, desperately trying not to die.
He forces the reader to experience the exhaustion and the overwhelming scale of the subject matter. But eventually, all of that rigorous buildup and mounting dread pays off.
We reach the climax of the novel, the frantic, terrifying final 3 days of the voyage.
For weeks, Ahab has been violently interrogating every passing ship they encounter, asking his obsessive, singular question, "Has seen the white whale?"
And then finally, the ocean yields its monster. The sensory details of this 3-day chase are visceral.
On day 1, the whale is spotted. Ahab lowers his harpoon boat, and the sheer physical power of Moby-Dick is unleashed.
The whale simply crushes the boat in its jaws. Wood is splintering, men are thrown into the freezing sea, and Ahab barely survives the encounter.
Day 2, the obsession overrides basic survival instincts. They lower the boats again, the boats are violently smashed once more, and this time, Ahab's prosthetic bone leg is snapped in half.
He is physically broken. Starbuck practically begs him to stop, pleading with him to recognize that this is a divine warning, a final chance to turn the ship around and live.
But Ahab is psychologically trapped. He cannot stop. To turn back now would mean accepting that he is merely a man. A limited, fragile, powerless human being subject to natural forces vastly greater than his own willpower.
His ego cannot survive that submission. So we arrive at day 3, the final apocalyptic confrontation.
The boats are lowered. Ahab finally gets close enough to hurl his harpoon into the flesh of the white whale.
But as the whale thrashes, the harpoon line whips around, catches Ahab by his own neck, and in a fraction of a second, he is violently yanked out of the boat and dragged down into the freezing, crushing depths of the ocean forever.
His own weapon of vengeance literally becomes his executioner's noose.
But the destruction doesn't end with Ahab. The whale turns its attention to the Pequod itself. It rams the massive wooden ship staving in its hull.
The ship rapidly sinks, creating a massive swirling vortex that pulls the entire crew, the masts, the flags, every remaining trace of their existence down into the abyss. Everyone drowns in the silence of the sea.
Everyone except one, the sole survivor.
Ishmael is pulled toward the vortex but manages to pop up to the surface. And the mechanism of his survival is the ultimate irony of the novel.
He survives by floating on a coffin, specifically a wooden coffin that Queequeg had meticulously carved for himself earlier in the voyage when he had fallen deathly ill.
Ishmael floats on the sealed wooden box for an entire day and night, drifting on a soft dirge of the sea until another ship, the Rachel, finally spots him and pulls him from the water.
And he delivers that haunting epilogue line drawn directly from the book of Job. "And I only am escaped alone to tell thee."
It is a breathtaking, devastating conclusion to the epic, and it's vital to ground this cosmic narrative in its raw, real-world context.
In the 1850s, whaling wasn't some obscure romantic maritime adventure. It was the exact equivalent of the modern global oil industry.
Whale oil lit the streets of London and New York. It lubricated the machines of the Industrial Revolution, and Melville lived this brutal reality.
He worked as a common sailor on a whaling ship for 18 grueling months. The grease, the sweat, the profound danger, the blood described on the deck, the Pequod, it is all drawn from an intense, lived reality.
Which perfectly explains why its legacy is so pervasive long after the whaling industry collapsed. The cultural ripples of this supposed failure from 1851 have touched almost every corner of modern storytelling.
It deeply inspired literary titans like William Faulkner and existentialists like Albert Camus.
It serves as the direct, undeniable spiritual ancestor to the man versus beast narrative of Steven Spielberg's Jaws.
Even the Starbucks coffee chain took its name from the Pequod's voice of reason, the first mate Starbuck. The image of the white whale has transcended literature to become the universal cultural symbol for an impossible, self-destructive obsession.
It has permeated our collective consciousness so thoroughly that people who have never read a single page of Melville's prose instantly understand what it means to hunt your white whale.
So bringing all of this philosophical weight back to you, the listener, why does exploring this massive, intimidating text matter today?
You do not read this novel for a simple, breezy plot. You read it to look over the absolute edge of human existence.
It is a profound, unflinching reminder that life, much like the ocean itself, is vast, messy, terrifying, occasionally incredibly boring, and deeply beautiful. And most importantly, it offers no single easy answer to the desperate questions we throw at it.
As we wrap up this exploration, I want you to consider a final thought to mull over. Returning to the profound, beautiful irony of Ishmael's survival at the very end, think about the object that saves him.
He survives a cosmic catastrophe by clinging to Queequeg's coffin.
A coffin is an object designed and built explicitly for death. It represents the absolute end of the human journey. Yet, in a chaotic, violent, and utterly indifferent universe, it is this exact vessel of death, which also serves as the literal, physical remnant of a deep, cross-cultural human friendship that ultimately rises from the vortex to provide life and salvation.
What an incredible, enduring image to leave on, the vessel of death becoming the raft of life held together by the memory of a friend. Keep questioning the depths of your own world. Look closely at the pasteboard masks around you, and we will catch you on the next deep